So I'm constantly saying that I watched a lot of Dragon Ball when I was a kid, and we'd come home from school and we'd watch it, and me and my friends would talk about it and all this other stuff. Well, either most of what I watched as a child came from the Cell Saga, or I just don't remember shit from 25 years ago because I don't remember a lot of what happened in this, the Frieza Saga or whatever you want to call it. Welcome to Dragon Ball Z, the wholly new manga that has absolutely nothing to do with Dragon Ball, at least here in the West. Which on one level, I understand why we separated it at the point that we separated it at, and started it as a new thing. But on the other hand, having now the new perspective of having read Dragon Ball before going into Dragon Ball Z, I'm not entirely sure why we separated it, because it really just feels like the same old Dragon Ball that we've always had. Because of course, yes, now there's a time jump, so it's a good stopping point. But then again, this isn't the first time jump that we've had. And yes, now all of a sudden, oh my gosh, an alien came down from outer space. And we're now aliens from outer space. But this is a manga where you go and you train with God in order to fight in a tournament against Frankenstein. It's like, this isn't like breaking the logic of Dragon Ball to have some massive paradigm shift where aliens arrive. Anyway. Before we get started here, if you hear me say anything like previously or last time or beforehand, I did do a video where I talked about Dragon Ball and reviewed it as well. Just in case you didn't see it, I'll go ahead and link that in the description below. Also, I'm trying to film this while being quite sick. I've been trying to get to this video for like the past week now, and life just keeps getting in my way, and now I don't feel well, and we're going to suffer through this and just barrel through anyway. We're going to get this done one way or the other. So if I look or sound like I'm not well, it's because I'm not. Anyway, back to work, right? This starts off with a bad guy showing up whose power level far exceeds anything that we've seen before in this manga, and he just pretty much crushes everybody in sight. This is very reminiscent of the first appearance of the Demon King Piccolo. The only difference is the last time when Goku was fighting Piccolo, I made the comment that there was a certain point in the fight where I actually feared for Goku's life. In this fight, Goku actually dies. Also, this is a good time to transition into talking about the comedy in this manga. I know that doesn't seem funny, but I'm forever saying things like, oh, the power levels didn't match, or the new power level of this guy coming in, and I talk about it as though it's something that's like intangible, something obscure, something like that. And I talk about it in everything, not just Dragon Ball. Like, I'll be watching or reading something very different from this, and even fighting, I'll be like, oh, the power levels just didn't match up. And like I said, when I'm referring to it, it's normally something just obscure and intangible. And it's just hilarious to me that Dragon Ball took that idea and made it something tangible, made it something like a scanner that you put on your head can literally read the power level of the other character. It's just hilarious. And then they put such a strong focus on it, it cracks me up every time a power level is mentioned. And then these power levels are going to turn into like a running joke that's going to run through the rest of the entire manga, or at least the rest of the section that I just read. And it's hilarious because they literally mean nothing, and they will spike or go up or down or around really. Sometimes there's a reason, sometimes there isn't, and they just fluctuate, seemingly for no reason, to the point where even Vegeta realizes the scanner is doing me no good, this is dumb, and he takes it off and just kind of starts, feeling his way through the battle, as you probably should. Now, speaking of Vegeta, we should probably talk about him for a second too, because Vegeta is the ultimate MVP of all Dragon Ball characters ever created, right? Well, if you had any conversation with any one of my friends ever back when we were kids, that was the only conclusion that you were allowed to come to back then. And I vaguely remember not quite understanding why everybody was so obsessed with Vegeta, and at the same time actively picking other characters to be my favorite just because it was almost annoying that everybody liked Vegeta so much. So I was like, well, he's not my favorite. And to be quite honest, I can't really say yet if he is actually that S tier character that everybody seems to think that he is, because in this particular section, the Frieza, Namek, all of that stuff, he really just kind of gets introduced and he just starts to get that character building. And actually at the end of this, I think we're at a point where it really feels like he could tip into that greatness that that I seem to remember everybody always talking about. But at this point, he hasn't quite got there yet. At least by the end of this one, he hasn't really reached that level of S tier character. So I can't really comment yet. Although I do feel like he really did get a wonderful arc in this section as far as going from primary antagonist of the story and his transition from that to being just another member of the group. Although, if we're being fair, that is pretty much the exact same arc that every other bad guy in the entire story up to this point has gone through. I mean, just look at Piccolo. And like I just said, I feel like Vegeta's really getting ready in the next section to pivot into being just a wonderful character, because if we consider that he has the exact same character arc as Piccolo does, you know, bad guy to good guy, or at least member of the group, then you look at Piccolo's now transition from, now that he is kind of just another member of the group, he's just maybe one of the best members of the story, just in the sense of enjoying every panel that he happens to be a part of and the stories that he gets to do, because he has this massive beef with Goku that never really materializes or goes anywhere whatsoever. But then at the same time, he's going to take Gohan under his wing and basically become this, I don't want to say father figure, but main trainer of mentor of Gohan for like the next good chunk of the story. It's just absolutely priceless. And as a matter of fact, I would include the training of Gohan by Piccolo as one of the absolute high points for the entire manga that I have read so far. And I am including all of Dragon Ball in that. That is how good the section of Piccolo training Gohan was. Speaking of training, Goku, while he's dead, is now going to go and train with the Lord of Worlds, or whatever his name is. And this isn't one of my favorite training sections that we've gotten so far. Like, this was just meh at best, this whole section. It wasn't that great as far as training sessions are concerned, because that seems to be a repeating thing that happens a lot in this manga. But it did have one of my favorite throwaway jokes in the entire manga, and that was when the Lord of the Worlds was talking about how do you keep yourself entertained on such a small planet, and he goes into some speech about counting blades of grass and studying the stars in the sky, and lately I've taken up driving, and there's just this little road that goes around the planet with one car. Wonderful. Anyway, back to Vegeta. I hear a lot about the appearance of Vegeta and his entrance into the story and how great it is, and then especially the battle between Goku and Vegeta. I hear so many good things about how great it is, and it's the best battle in Dragon Ball or something like that, or at least the best battle that they've had. I don't know. And I will say that it was okay. Like, I didn't see anything really truly so special about that fight. It was fine. It wasn't bad, but I wasn't like jumping up and down, losing my mind over it or anything like that, which there are far better fights coming later on in this saga. Actually, as a matter of fact, to consider the Saiyan saga, the sagas kind of confuse me in general around Dragon Ball, because there are so many of them for some seemingly no reason. Like, the fact that they consider the Saiyan saga to be like its own saga is crazy to me. That's not an entire saga. That might be the opener to a saga. It was like one of these little volumes, and it's like, well, Saiyan Saga's over, and I'm like, oh no, we're not doing volume read-throughs. I don't want to read bigger sections of that if I'm going to be reading and reviewing Dragon Ball Z, so I had to lump the Saiyan Saga together with the Frieza Saga just to have a couple of volumes to read. And on top of that, it didn't even really feel like an entire saga in and of itself. Actually, as a matter of fact, if you put the Saiyan Saga together with the Frieza Saga, now it actually feels like we're telling a complete story, because we have that opener with the Saiyans, we get to see Vegeta, and then we transition into Namek, and Vegeta kind of ends up becoming the de facto main character of the story for a good chunk of it, to be quite honest. And now, then once that all concludes with the Frieza, that actually felt more like a complete story to me. But whatever, what do I know? This isn't my niche. Anyway, like I said, now it's time to go to Namek, and our entire crew is either dead or in the hospital. So pretty much the only one left is Krillin, and thank God we've got a spaceship, and we're just going to jump on the spaceship and go, and it's going to be Krillin and Bulma and Gohan, the child. And the three of you are going to go take on Vegeta again. Remember, he just killed everybody by himself, and you're going to go there and you're going to take him on and an entire another planet with just the three of you? That's your plan. Anyway, all jokes aside, the next section, once they get to Namek, was probably the most magnetic section of Dragon Ball that I have read so far. And by magnetic, I mean just the fact that once I started turning pages, I just felt like I had to keep turning pages. I just didn't want to stop, and then I would get to like the end of one of the volumes and I would just put it back on the shelf and grab the next volume. Normally when I'm reading something and I get to the end of one of these volumes, I'm normally like, yeah, that feels like a pretty good stopping point, and I'll just take a break for a day or so. And with these, I was like, I'd set it down and I'd just kind of grab the next one and at least peek into it, like, what's going to happen next? Like, so it was very, almost addicting, just turning those pages and getting through the section. It was wonderful. And like I said, I can really see why this section of the story does a lot for Vegeta lovers, because he really does, like I said, become kind of like the main character of the story for a while, because Goku's not around. He's off laid up in a hospital, and the only other people that we have to fight on this planet is Piccolo and Gohan. And they're really too busy running around, sneaking around, trying to fly under the radar and stay hidden from everybody, because they literally can't fight anyone. And Vegeta has to take front and center, at least as far as the action is concerned. And boy does he, and boy is it just wonderful. Especially once the Ginyu Force shows up with their weird dance moves and cheerleader poses, which I don't even know what to say about this. The comedy in this is wonderful, and I love it. I can't explain how it just, the tone that he chooses to use for the comedy and the tone that he chooses to use for the manga just have this perfect blending, and they fit together so well. It never feels out of place. Nothing ever feels like discordant. It is just, oh my God, it's a masterclass in both action and comedy. It is wonderful. I can't say enough. Also, there's a very good sense of like dread and build up in this section. We get really so many teases to the power level of Frieza and the abilities of Frieza, and just that dread that is constantly building in the background of what's going to happen when we finally have to face him, or when he decides to finally throw his hat into the ring. There is a very slow build to the tension of him being in the background, and it is a very, very well done build to that tension. Even if the character of Frieza, all in all, I thought was just okay. He wasn't like knock your socks off, kind of blow you away kind of a character on a character level. But that, like I said, that tension that's being built in the background, the fear and the dread of him once he decides to come into the battle is real and is quite tangible. Also, this section of the story has Goku's best training sequence of the entire manga so far. If that last one with the Lord of Worlds guy was mediocre, the one with him on the ship is not. That was great. I'm not even sure why I liked it so much, but I really liked that training sequence a lot. And then when he steps off of the ship and he's basically overpowered at this point, oh, so satisfying. And we've been here before, right? With Goku training and powering up, leveling up, becoming stronger, and then going to fight the bad guy, and ultimately winning the day and all of that stuff. But not quite like this, you know? And I kind of hinted at this earlier in the video when I was talking about how Piccolo's story is almost the exact same story as Vegeta. But this manga is essentially doing what I would consider circular storytelling. It is telling basically the exact same story over and over and over again, but it is doing it in slightly different ways. And we're spiraling outwards or maybe circling in different directions. So if I were to lay down the basics of what's happening in this section of the story, I could probably make it mirror the basics of a section of Dragon Ball almost perfectly. But if I were to pick a panel from Dragon Ball and pick a panel from Dragon Ball Z in the Namek section, they would be almost unrecognizable by how vastly different they are. It is, I don't know if I've ever seen circular storytelling done this well, in the sense that we are just so clearly doing the same thing over and over and over and over again and just traveling in circles, but that circle has moved and evolved so much over the course of the story that the story now is literally almost unrecognizable when you compare it to the story of the beginning. It's wonderful how it feels like you're doing basically almost the same thing over and over again while traveling so far. Like I said, maybe the best version of this kind of storytelling that I have seen. Also, in this section, we have the very first transformation into Super Saiyan. Now, if I remember back to my childhood, I don't remember the Super Saiyan having as much buildup as it does. They mention it constantly, especially Vegeta, the legend of the Super Saiyan. Maybe I could be the first Super Saiyan. There's only one that happens in 1,000 years. They're forever bringing up the idea of somebody turning Super Saiyan. And I don't ever remember it having that kind of a buildup before. Which then in turn adds this extra layer of buildup and anticipation to the fact of somebody going Super Saiyan. So you know it's going to happen, and you have a pretty good idea of when it's going to happen, and then it actually happens when you think it's going to happen. So there's not some type of oh no, we're going to be sneaky and do a rug pull or anything else. It's not like some big shock or some big surprise, but because of the way that it's been teased and layered and built up, and you really are set to expect this in a certain way and at a certain time, and then it is executed in that way at that time, actually, instead of making it feel somehow cheapened by all of that, it actually adds to it and makes that moment feel more satisfying when you get it. If you can't tell, I enjoyed this section of the story. I had quite a good time with it, all in all. I thought it was quite good. And then, of course, at the end of it, Goku beats Frieza. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. And I went ahead and I read through the section all the way up until Frieza comes back to Earth as like a little robot child with his dad, and Trunks shows up and kills him. And that's when I stopped, because that felt like the natural stopping point was when Frieza actually died. And I think what I did was actually read past the end of the Frieza Saga and into the beginning of the Cell Saga, because once Trunks shows up, I think I technically was actually reading the beginning of the next section. But that's where I stopped. So that's where, I'm going to get the video to. I'm probably fucking this all up. It's all right. Don't worry about it. But now, as of all of that I just read, this entire section that I've made up as my own saga or my own arc, I would say personally, this was definitely, for me and in my personal taste, a step up from Dragon Ball, as much as I really enjoyed Dragon Ball. But this luckily it maintained that same sense of humor, even if it dialed it back a little bit, but it also dialed up the action and the intensity and the stakes and some of that feeling that you got from when Demon King Piccolo first showed up and just trounced through Kid Goku. You get that, but more of it, like a lot more of it, and at a much higher level, and all while maintaining that same feel of the Dragon Ball comedy and the oopsie daisiness of it and that circular storytelling. So we're still cycling through the ideas that we cycled through before, and now we're adding in Vegeta. It was more of the same, but better. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give this one an 8.5. I feel like I could actually maybe let it have a 9, but I'm going to pull it back to an 8.5 for right now, just because I don't know. I haven't sat with it long enough to know if it's truly great enough for a 9. It probably is, but we're going to go 8.5, and then that gives me room to get better. Maybe the Cell Saga is the greatest thing that's ever happened to manga, or maybe it'll be a step down. I don't know. We're going to find out. Anyway, as always, everybody, the link for my Patreon's in the description below. The link for my Discord's in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.